Today, we're going to talk about cultivars. So obviously, we talked about species last lecture. So now we're going to dive a little bit more into just some like key Vitis vinifera cultivars that are kind of critical around the world. All right, let's talk about grapes and wine. That's why you're here. With grapes, we have the most widely planted horticultural crop in the world. So sorry, apples. I know Cornell's the apple place, right? But sorry, we beat you out big time. Obviously, these are old numbers from 2012. It really hasn't changed all that much, this story. Apples have increased a bit, I think, but still we're far beyond apples in terms of acreage. And there are, as you'd expect, tons of variation, right? We have lots of different cultivars, lots of different species, as you've already seen with the previous lectures. But also within the different cultivars or varieties, there's many different kind of types of those cultivars, right? There's different clones, which we'll talk about what clones are. But there's different, even like with Pinot Noir, there's different types of Pinot Noir. Okay, so there's tons of variation. So you'll never stop learning about grapes and wine if you so choose. Okay, so just to kind of recap from last lecture, right? So our plant is in the family of Vitaceae, which we can break into two genera, right? Two genuses. The plural is genera. And right, so the two genuses are Vitis, or genera, are Vitis and Muscadinea. Right, so let's go down Muscadinea. Remember I said there's those three species within Muscadinea here. Really, truly, it's rotundifolia. It's all basically just one, which is Muscadinea rotundifolia. Notice again the problem. This is an old diagram, and actually not that old, it's 2015. But notice here it says Vitis rotundifolia. Recall, it's not Vitis rotundifolia, it's Muscadinea rotundifolia, okay? So these are North American species down here. We use them a lot for rootstock, like we've mentioned. So rotundifolia is tolerant of nematodes, which are little kind of microscopic worms in the soil that nibble on the roots. And they vector, one in particular, vectors a virus called fan leaf virus, which is incredibly destructive to grapevines. So rotundifolia can be tolerant to that. And so that's generally why rotundifolia is used as one of the rootstock parents. So now if we go down the Vitis side of things, we have a ton of species in here. Most of the ones you see listed here, again, are rootstock species. Some of these are used for hybrids, for hybrid grapes, like we read here at Cornell, and also like table and juice grapes. But most of these are, like Vitis vinifera is mostly used for wine, and that's the most economically important species we have. So, right, so there's vinifera down there, Vitis vinifera, and then you can see Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, Chenin, Gewurz, Grenache, Merlot, Muscat, all those things. These are all the varieties that you know, right? One that you don't see in here is Thompson Seedless, which is a table grape. So these are all the wine grapes, because this is a book about wine. But Thompson Seedless, or Kishmish, if you're from the Middle East, or Sultana if you're from Australasia. So Thompson Seedless is a seedless. It's when you go to the grocery store and you pick up the kind of like cheaper, just kind of generic green table grapes. Those are Thompson Seedless. But then, so remember though, within Vitis, we have all these other ones. So Vitis estivalis is that American species. That's where Norton comes from, if you're familiar with Norton, if you're from Virginia. You have things like Vitis berlandieri, which is a rootstock parent that we use for usually conferring lime tolerance, high lime soils. It's also very drought tolerant. Remember, like Vitis labrusca, that's the major parent of like Concord and Niagara, right? So Welch's grape juice is labruscana, the Concord. Vitis riparia, Vitis rupestris, remember these are also very popular rootstock parents. Vitis riparia is kind of the least drought tolerant of all of these, because remember riparian strip. So riparia lives along riverbanks, and it has a rooting architecture that goes outward because it doesn't want to go down into the water table and get, drown its roots, right? So it's typically, the rooting is very shallow with Vitis riparia, therefore its drought tolerance isn't super great, okay? Yeah, so then, like I said, these are mostly used for wine, these down here, but also the table grape, Thompson seedless, and other table grapes have Vitis vinifera in them, okay? And again, variety, cultivar, you're going to hear me say it all the time. You're going to hear me interchange these things. They're not the same, all right? So yeah, variety is the wild species, cultivar is the cultivated variety, all right? So yeah, you're going to hear me interchange it. You're going to hear the industry interchange it. Okay, so Vitis vinifera, it's, I think I mentioned this in the previous lecture, but it likely originated in the Transcaucasus, Azerbaijan, Georgia, that area. And there's, many different varieties, and it's spread. So it spread from the Transcaucasus down through like Armenia, down through the Middle East, and then up through like Egypt, and then from like Egypt into like Greece, and then Italy, and then around the Mediterranean, and then around the world. There are about 24,000 different named cultivars, but remember, we have grapes everywhere, all around the world, and we all have different names for things. So truly, there's somewhere between 5 to 10,000 different unique cultivars, and really, there's only, I would say, about 450 kind of economically important cultivars globally. 35 varieties actually account for 66% of the world's wine grape, of the world's wine grapes. So some of the common synonyms that you're going to see out there on the marketplace would be like Shiraz and Syrah. So Shiraz is just the kind of Australian term for Syrah, and then Syrah is what you would see in France and many of the cool climate growing regions that grow Syrah. The reality is people do use Shiraz outside of Australia to kind of say to you that like this is a Syrah that was grown in a hot or warm climate, and then people will use Syrah a lot of times to tell the consumer this is a Syrah that was grown in a cooler climate. All right. Then of course, Pinot Grigio, Pinot Gris. Pinot Grigio is Italian. Pinot Gris is the French. Okay. Pinot Grigio, again, what people do in the New World with this is to let you know, if they say it's Pinot Grigio, it's to let you know it's kind of a less ripe version of Pinot Gris. It's a more acidic, linear, like straight down the palate version of Pinot Gris. And then people will use Pinot Gris to let you know it's a little more ripe and it's a little bigger in the mouth, a little less acid, right? Less linear than Pinot Grigio. Chenin Blanc and Steen, you're unlikely to ever see the word Steen unless you go to South Africa. South Africa makes some of the best Chenin Blanc in the world. It's absolutely outstanding. And in South Africa, they, for a very long time, called it Steen. And you will still see it on some of the older wineries in South Africa. They will call it Steen. But yeah, generally, you're not going to see it. And then this one here, right? So Zinfandel. Okay, so I hope you've all had Zinfandel. If you're from the United States, I assume you've had Zinfandel. It's one of our favorite grapes here in this country: Zinfandel, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Chardonnay. So Zinfandel is actually Primitivo, which is the Italian. So it's an Italian word, right? And it turns out that Primitivo is actually Krzyżank Did I pronounce it correctly? Probably not. Krzyżank Castellansky, which is a Croatian variety. So there was a researcher at UC Davis. Her name is Carol Meredith, and she does like genetic research. And I don't know exactly. The story is pretty funny how this all happened, but anyways, she was doing work looking at genetics of grapevines, and she discovered that Zinfandel is actually Primitivo, which is actually this Croatian variety. So that the reality is Krojolon Kazalanski probably moved to Italy, and then the Italians went nuts with it and planted a lot of Primitivo. They started calling it Primitivo and started planting it, and that's where like people thought Primitivo was native to Italy, but the reality is it's probably native to Croatia. And when all this happened, it created a huge stink in the wine industry. A lot of folks in Italy were like, no, it's our grape. And you're like, probably not. And then the other thing it did is it opened the door for like American producers to then start calling Zinfandel Primitivo, which a lot of Italian folks were getting kind of like anxious about because they thought it would kind of hurt their sort of brand reputation of Primitivo. If there was a bunch of Primitivo now in the United States. The reality is essentially nobody started calling Zinfandel Primitivo because Zinfandel, at this point when this happened, Zinfandel was already kind of a brand name within the United States and a huge grape and fetching pretty high bottle prices. So there was no reason to call it Primitivo, which actually most Americans don't really know anyways. So yeah. So here's just a bit of fun for you.
Look at the Italian countryside. Look at my white linen suit. Look at that beautiful woman and how she looks at me. And look at this. Primitivo, Italian wine. Primitivo, genetically identical to Zinfandel? Maybe. But I'm not Italian, and that is not my wife, and this is not my wine. Look at my independent Croatian country, birthplace of Zinfandel, free of all communists. Look at my football friends. Witness my football jersey. And this is Krojolnak Kastelanski, Croatian wine. Genetically identical to Zinfandel? Maybe. Did I pronounce it correctly? Who cares? Because this is not Croatia, and I am not a soccer man. This is California. This is baseball. That was a home run. This is my wife. These are my vines, and this is my wine. Zinfandel, Passo's wine.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. That's the Paso Wine Man. There was like a series of advertisements that the Paso Robles wine community put together, starring that actor. It was kind of it's obviously sort of a play off of Dos Equis, Most Interesting Man in the World. It's very cool. It honestly, I think, really helped put the Paso Robles AVA on the map, Paso Robles region on the map. And they make very fine wines in Paso Robles.